Now got our third keynote speech of the morning, or slight morning with a bit of the afternoon, and delighted to welcome Nick Pett, Deputy Director of the Ministry of Defence, and he's going to give a keynote speech about "You've Got a Friend in Me, the importance of being an LGBT ally." So over to you, Nick.
Hello. Am I coming through okay? Brilliant. Well, welcome to the cubbyhole under my middle child's bunk bed, which is my office during these times. Thank you very much for joining me. And good afternoon. My name is Nick Pett, as Adrian has said. I'm a senior civil servant in the Ministry of Defence. I've been in the MOD for 21 years, the same amount of time that I've been in the civil service for my sins. I haven't gone anywhere else at any stage, so I know it quite well. And I'm here to talk to you a bit about allyship. I've got about half an hour, but I'll aim to talk at you probably for a lot less than you might expect. So there's plenty of room for us to have a good conversation and discussion and questions afterwards. I know you've already got in your delegate packs some information about the importance of allies and some of the things that people can do. So I'll try and build on that to begin with, as well as explaining how I've chosen to interpret allyship and what I do as an ally to try and develop diversity and build inclusion. And I think it's important to say that that's not just a lovely, fluffy, positive thing to be doing. It's also about combating phobia, hatred, denial and discrimination, just in case we get sort of trapped in thinking that it's easy or positive work. It's not. But before I start in on that, there's just a couple of things that I want to sort of kick off with. And the first is to begin with a quote from Tony Kushner, who wrote Angels in America, which you may or may not be familiar with. If you're not, then I suggest that you watch it. I'm 2/3 of the way through it, just trying to find a time to watch it because it's not massively suitable for watching in front of the family. There's some colourful language, as I'll evidence in a moment. And the quote, I think, is very important to understanding allyship and what it's like to be LGBT plus in a society where people talk a lot about tolerance as opposed to acceptance or some kind of positive embracing. And what Tony had to say is that what AIDS shows us is the limits of tolerance, that it's not enough to be tolerated, because when the shit hits the fans, you find out how much tolerance is worth. Nothing. And underneath all the tolerance is intense, passionate hatred. So I would just ask people to think about that while we're going through this session, because I think it's important to bear that in mind. But I also just want to take a moment to reflect on why it's weird that I'm here talking to you. Why is someone like me here talking to you about allyship? Because I'm white, I'm cisgender, I'm a man, I'm middle class, I have no visual disabilities, I'm heterosexual. I have little to no need of allyship, and therefore little to no lived experience or understanding of that need or the impact of allyship or the lack of allyship. And it's quite a strange thing in a way to centre the ally, not the people or the person that I or we are allied to. And that should remind us as allies that it's not about us. That in this instance, it's all about LGBT plus people and centering them, their experiences, their potential, their needs. As allies, we've always got to remind ourselves of that fact and stay connected to that. And the other thing I want to say about the oddness of allyship in a way is that it's very easy to let our egos or our need for reward or recognition or for gratitude to creep forward. And we can't be doing this work for thanks or profile, especially if we're really going to mean it and we're really going to advocate and represent. We have to remember that as allies, we begin by reminding people, by demanding of them the basic rights and freedoms that we already have, the respect that LGBT plus people are entitled to but are consistently denied. We're not giving people extras, bonuses, free gifts. We're fighting for the basics here, for the right of LGBT plus people to exist in the way that allies may never have had to fight for. And I think it's really important to remember that. I don't mean to dismiss intersectionality or the fact that allies can be anybody, just to highlight the fact that someone like me has never had to fight to get to where I am, to be who I am, to exist in the way that I am. Other people have done. And that's got to be absolutely central to my understanding of the allyship that I purport to give. Otherwise, I'll lose sight of what I'm doing, why, and frankly, won't be very good at it. So I'll sort of leave that there for people to mull over. I'm very happy to come back to talk about that during the questions section. But so to get into allyship a little bit further about, what is it? What does it mean? How does it work? I've chosen to interpret allyship as a fundamental change to my life and my work. And by my life and work, I mean my personal life, not just my work life. And I very much hope that some, if not all of you, might do that too, because I think that's what real allyship is about. And what that means is that I've chosen to spend my time, my work time, my personal time, learning so that I can better understand the lived experiences of LGBT plus people and what my LGBT plus colleagues and friends want and need, both in terms of the changes that they want to see, that they need to see, but also what they want from somebody in my position, in a position of leadership and seniority. So what I do is I read, I watch, I listen. I've made queer publications a core part of my reading life, and I think it's really important that reading is absolutely central to learning. But if you don't make queerness, queer content, queer publications, queer authors a central part of that, then you will be missing out on a central element of being an ally, which is developing that understanding. But you can take it still further, I think, and that is that I seek out not just writing or media product about LGBT plus lived experience, but queer authors, queer artists. I look for LGBT plus owned businesses to spend my money in. I read queer fiction and LGBT plus histories. I talk to museum curators about how they are transforming collections and exhibitions to represent LGBT plus history that was either ignored or written out or expunged. And all of that is designed to underpin everything that I do, because I think if you, as an ally, aren't properly educating yourself, and that's by your own efforts, I hasten to add, because what I think is really important is you don't place the burden for your learning on the same people who've had to experience that discrimination and that disadvantage. You've got to do the work yourself. And then I try to take that forward so that you can see and hear my LGBT plus advocacy and allyship everywhere I go. So I wear symbols and slogans of support and celebration, on my lanyard, on my lapel, on my t-shirts. I talk about the things that I see and hear and read with my cishet colleagues and friends. And we're all familiar with the sort of water cooler conversations that we have. And I think probably if you're interested in being an ally, think about those conversations and just how much they focus on cisgender heterosexual experience and the things that cisgender heterosexual colleagues are doing and understanding. And think instead about how much you can introduce a completely different set of experiences to those everyday normal conversations and what impact that could have. I'm a huge fan of Twitter for all of its ills, and I tweet relentlessly. I blog at work and I support other people who do it. I look for the phobics in my workplace, whether it's virtually or for real, and I call them out and I put counter arguments wherever I find them. And it's hard work and sometimes it's painful, but it's important to do that, particularly given my seniority and my leadership position, because if I'm not putting that viewpoint forwards, how is anybody to understand that that's the character of the organization that we want to have, or the organization that I represent? I look at things like recruitment activity and HR policy and practices to proactively suggest ways in which we might change those to try and remove some of the inbuilt disadvantage and discrimination. And I hasten to add that by and large, those things are nothing to do with what I do for a living. I think in part I'm paid for it because I'm a senior civil servant, and part of my job is to have corporate impact, which means that I interpret that as being entitled to stick my oar in anywhere where I think it can be of value. And it means I frequently step out of lane and I think probably upset my peer group. But never mind, because that's part of what my advocacy is designed to be all about. I make a conscious effort always in my work to try and see if there's something about LGBT plus lived experience that needs to be factored in or taken into account. And just to give a sort of concrete example of that, one of the things that the Ministry of Defence has done a lot of work on in recent years is looking at how we build peace in those operations where we've been working overseas and trying to end conflict, or we've begun conflict in order to end conflict. And over the years, I think you will be aware that something that has become much more prominent in that understanding of peace building is feminism, women, peace and security. Well, the same principles are true for LGBT plus people and experience, because what you're trying to understand are the different impacts of conflict on different populations and the different needs of those people in trying to address the building and the maintenance of peace. And then in my personal life, I wear my rainbow laces with pride at rugby training, so that the minis that I coach can see them, can ask questions about them and start their learning as early as possible. I wear my nail varnish when I'm doing cubs. I'm a cub leader, so that the kids can see that you can be free to express yourselves however you like. It doesn't matter what gender stereotypes or preconceptions might be. I have 3 children, and I talk to them about sexuality and heteronormativity, and my house and my life are designed and are sort of constantly being reconstructed to be welcoming and embracing of my queer colleagues, friends and family. So in short, I take every opportunity I can to tell the story of LGBT plus people, to evidence experience and to try and explain the need for change. And then also as a leader to try and help design and push for that. And as part of that, I also spend quite a lot of whatever spare time I can conjure up sending emails to the other senior leaders in my department, or ringing them up or tweeting at them to try and get time with them to talk about things within either the armed forces or the civil service that have a particular impact on LGBT plus people. I'm just going to sort of sum up by reading off something that I wrote for the Civil Service LGBT plus network to explain allyship, and partly because it's slightly emotional, but which I think is a really important element of proper allyship. And then I'll be open for questions and discussion. So my allyship is a promise to LGBT plus people and is an offer of love and friendship. It is the commitment to willingly use my time and energy to understand historical and present day hatred, violence and discrimination towards LGBT plus people. It is the guarantee that I will listen to you in order to better understand your lived experiences, the desire to read, listen to, see and be with you. It is the promise that I will use that learning to help build a more inclusive life, workplace and society. I will carry my allyship with me wherever I go, and you will be able to see it and hear it wherever I am. I will speak out against phobic behaviours, cultures and people. I will critically analyse the policies, practices and outputs of my employer and work to understand and respond to potential and current developments in our society and internationally. I will work hard to educate fellow cishet people and to help others become allies. I will celebrate you, support you, amplify you and defend you. I will do my best to never let you down, and I am hugely proud to be with you. And that, I think, is what allyship is all about. So I'm very ready for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. And I have to say that statement is one of the most fulfilling and heart-rendering statements of someone who is LGBT plus that I've heard on the webinar for some time. So thank you for that. That's really appreciated. We already have a couple of questions in, which is great. And David, one of our fellow panelists, asked you, as I've said, a great passionate commitment you're showing for the LGBT plus allyship. A question for you: if a heterosexual colleague, so they were concerned about being an ally because people might mistakenly think they were gay themselves, what would you say to them?
What's the problem? Is the first thing I would say. Why does that matter? What if you were? Because I really think that you've got to put it back to the person and start to get to the root of what that says, which is potentially a fear of being other, but also of being othered, And so, okay, so what you're experiencing is the first part of what it is like to be LGBT plus in this organisation, which is you're even though you are beginning to worry about what other people might think about you. So think about that and think, do you want to be that kind of person that doesn't want to be identified, even if you aren't? Because that potentially says quite a lot about you. And it's not necessarily going to solve the problem straight off the bat, but I think you need to send that person away to have a good think about these things. And I think it's a really important point. And I think it goes right to the heart of why there is a problem with acceptance of LGBT plus people and the full embracing of all of the sexual and gender identity diversity in society, is because underneath it all is so much ignorance and fear, and actually quite a deep understanding of what it must be like to be LGBT plus, because that person clearly knows something in there about what it would be like if they were. And to say, well, if you don't like that, then isn't it a brilliant thing to become an ally? And so what if someone misidentifies you? You can put them right or not. It's up to you.
Excellent answer, and a great response to that. I don't see any other questions. Just a couple of really nice thank yous to you for your comments and your presentation. But also, I think I want to try and push you a little bit around the word tolerance, because it's the one word that I don't particularly like. It's a word that quite a lot of people use as a way of possibly hiding that they have some unacceptability on something, but they use it as a cover. I would much rather use the word celebrate or acceptance. Acceptance is one way, celebration is another way. What do you feel are the best words to express that allyship in that sort of way?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm absolutely clearly with you on tolerate or tolerance, because I think we all know what it really means, which is that I'm choosing not to exercise my dislike. That's what tolerance means. I've got it, but I'm going to be okay with you because I've made that decision. I think, well, okay, that's not really giving me very much, is it? Because I understand that underneath it is that problem that you have with me, with who I am. I think acceptance is the bare minimum, because I think no one is asking anybody to be anything other than who they are. So at the very, very least, what I think you can expect human beings to do is to understand that who they are is not everything, and shouldn't be everything, and shouldn't dominate everything. And that there is a huge and wonderful variety of people out there in the world, and you just go, okay, good, great. I'm not those things, but there's nothing wrong with it. So on we roll. So I think acceptance is fine as a bare minimum. But what I want us to get towards, and I accept that in many ways what that is really is a sort of a first step. Because what I want us to get towards is that celebratory thing that you mentioned. Because the reality is that because of all the different experiences that people have and the different ways in which they express themselves, the amount of incredible art and living that can come from that, why wouldn't we want to celebrate that? And I think that's what we're trying to get towards, is that people don't have a problem with people living their lives differently to each other and thinking, well, that's great and that's great. They don't cancel each other out. They're not mutually exclusive. You can accept that and enjoy the fact that you have your. So for me, I have my heterosexual way of living, and I have made some choices that are pretty bland and pretty sort of cliched heterosexual ways of living my life, and that's fine. And there will be other ways that people will live a heterosexual life, and there'll be other ways in which people will live a gay life or a lesbian life. But all of those things are brilliant, and they conjure up so many different feelings and works of art, you know, whatever it might be. So I do absolutely want to move towards celebration, but I think that part of getting us there has to be, invidious as it might be, people like myself, you know, the bog standard straight white man in a position of leadership, speaking up, because studies have shown, and this is something that I've definitely read quite a bit about when it comes to feminist activism, is that in organisations like mine that are massively dominated by other straight white middle class men, the voices that have authority are voices like mine. And the first stage has got to be, in some ways, me making the point to people like me, but also bringing in the people that I'm advocating for and being able to say, look, here are these people, just like you in many ways, not like you in other ways. And those ways are brilliant, just like your ways are brilliant. So, yeah, I just want us to love each other. That's all. It's not a lot to ask.
Well, you've actually just touched on the next question, which you preempted so delightfully that I can segue into it. As David mentioned earlier in his presentation around love. And I think it's fair to say that it's quite a convivial concept, but it's something that's really critical in the workplace to have that celebration, but love as a way of bringing people together. Now, I have to say, I've not felt that probably in any organisation that I particularly worked for, but I think it's a goal that we all ultimately should aim for. But it's interesting how the words change, and I think it's fair to say that at ENEI we have a sort of roadmap that goes from equality to diversity to inclusion. But I think that inclusion bit is now extended to belonging, to intersectionality, to celebration, to love. And it's how we're all on this journey together that makes that a critical journey to be on. Where do you see love in your workplace? Has that ever featured, or is that something that David needs to get going in there too?
No, it absolutely has. I think that, I mean, I'd be really amazed to find anybody who's ever worked anywhere for any length of time who hasn't loved the people that they work with, or at least someone that they work with, because we're human. That's how we work, I think. Now, whether you recognise it as such or are prepared to vocalise it is another matter entirely, and that's partly, you know, a personal thing. But I think it's absolutely true that it happens to us. And I suppose one of the things that I would say to heterosexual colleagues is that they quite possibly would feel entirely comfortable with saying that they have a love for their colleagues in a very, you know, heterosexual, platonic sort of way. Let's be really clear about this, get terribly defensive. But what is the difference with feeling that love for somebody who, you know, might be attracted to you, possibly? So what? You can still be friends. You can still be colleagues. You can still love each other. You can still have that kind of intense relationship. And I mean, I suppose there are two things there. The first is that for me, trying to express that love in the workplace, I mean, it's something that you've got to be very careful with, because obviously what that brings into play are quite clear issues of consent and physical contact and appropriate behaviour, quite rightly. But so, for example, with one or two of my gay male friends, because we would quite happily socially kiss each other when we see each other, not right now, obviously, in times of COVID, but in times before, if it's okay with them, I will just as happily kiss them on greeting them in the main concourse of my building, because that's normal. And I want people to see that. And I want people to see that whether the two people are two gay men or one gay man and one heterosexual man, because that's normal human behaviour. And that's a kind of love. And that's okay. But it's being able to show that to people, where probably the only kissing man to man they would previously have seen would be in staff college or something, where there was a French delegate and a British delegate. And even that would have been hilarious to witness in the huge degree of awkwardness on the part of the English delegate as the kissing continued, I would imagine, because we can be very like that, I think. But I think the other thing I want to say about love is that it's quite I think it's a relatively recent thing to talk about love is love, and when I say in the last few years, so the sort of the idea of love is love is a relatively new one and quite a powerful one, and understandably, and I don't have a problem with it per se. My concern is that what love is love does is that it elides the truth about relationships, whether they're long-term or medium-term intimate relationships or casual relationships, because I think we start to miss something about why there is a problem in our society about queerness and straightness, which is that at its root it comes back to sex and this enormous and totally false discomfort, fear, disgust, whatever it might be, for some straight people of thinking about what queer people do in the bedroom, which of course I think is hugely ironic, because many of the same things that heterosexual people do in the bedroom, but also don't like to talk about doing in their heterosexual lives. And I think that sometimes the sort of love is love stops us from getting to some of the root of why people are homophobic, transphobic, biphobic, because they can't accept and understand that there are different ways of being and expressing. And they've got this sort of ingrained idea that anything other than what they do is the wrong way of doing things. On what basis? Who's to say? And I would get into this more, but it starts to get quite graphic, and but I do think it's really, really important. So I suppose I encourage people in their allyship learning to read as deeply as they possibly can, and to think about that part of understanding heterosexual and queer lived experience and the totality of what it means, and to look at themselves and how they react to knowing and reading certain and seeing certain things. For example, just think about the fact that if you're heterosexual, what do you see in the cinema? You might go and watch some form of 18 certificate drama, and there'll be two heterosexual people having sex on the screen. Then you might go to the BFI Flair Film Festival, and if you haven't, then you really should. And you might see two men having sex on the screen. Now, you may well have a very different reaction to those things. And as a start point, that's fine, because you can't help immediately the way that your mind and your body react to things. But think about it. Try and understand why you might react in that way, and think, is that a real thing? Is that a thing I've chosen to be like? Or can I just go, that's something society has inculcated in me, and I don't want it anymore. I want to get rid of that. And instead I want to go, yep, it's two other people having sex. Great. Lucky them.
Exactly.
On we go.
Fantastic.
I don't know if that's where you thought this conversation was going to go, but
that's what I had anticipated to some extent. So no, that's absolutely fine. And actually, that's a good point to finish our sort of morning stroke early afternoon session on love, and hope everyone enjoys a good lunch break. And thank you to Nick for a fantastic conversation and a great presentation.